Well, good morning, Bellevue. Good morning, my friends. It's good to see you. It is a Friday. It's the 24th of April as we continue to meet together on a daily basis just to talk about the things that we're all experiencing. We are separate from each other, maybe physically, but we're experiencing them as a community. Today, I want to talk a little bit about the issue of grief. Now, we covered this in some prior days, but I want to come back to it because there's a big difference in the experience of what we can call acute grief versus chronic grief. And acute grief is grief that's associated with a very specific event. And so you can point to that event. For example, and probably the most common example of grief that we're aware of is when someone in our family, a relative, perhaps a friend, passes away, perhaps a grandparent, or perhaps an unexpected accident. It can be a family pet. When someone that we care about dies, we experience grief. It's important to remember that grief is healthy, it is necessary, and it's something that we will all go through. But when it's acute grief, in other words, it happens in relationship to a very specific event, we can always point to that event and we can process our grief through it happening and it being over. So, as in the case of the death of a loved one or a pet, after the death occurs and we go through maybe a funeral or some kind of memorial service, as we move further away from that event, it becomes easier to process our grief because our distance from the event increases and we have other things in our mind and other experiences that can occupy our emotions and our thoughts. But what happens when grief becomes chronic? What happens when every day is a continual experience of grief because of a situation that doesn't have a defined, really, maybe beginning, yes, but the beginning of this was kind of, especially for your kids, maybe even a little bit exciting to be getting out of school, kind of like a snow day. But what happens when it becomes a chronic experience? It doesn't really have a defined end. You can't point to a moment and say, okay, this is now over. What happens when grief becomes chronic? And when grief becomes chronic, it can become kind of like this dull sense that something is wrong. And it's with you maybe every day. And chronic grief can result in a decrease in our energy, a decrease in our emotional state. It can result in us spending a lot more time in general sadness and just kind of almost a numbness. And when that happens, we have to be intentional about acknowledging it, being honest about it, not denying it, but also speaking it out loud so that we can all, as a family, work on it together. For parents, this is especially important as your kids go through this prolonged period of not being sure exactly what's going to happen. So I made this visual for you, and I had one of these that I had handwritten, but this one I think is a little bit more useful that kind of looks at the various stages of grief. And as you're looking at this, you can see that there are 6 boxes. Now, you could make your own one of these, or you could add some boxes that might be appropriate to your family that describe the emotions better. But in each of these 6 boxes are the kinds of emotions that people experience when they're going through grief. One of those boxes is denial. That's up at the top. And these don't necessarily happen in this order. In fact, what's important about these boxes is that you can bounce from box to box to box, and different people can be in different boxes at the same time within a family. None of the boxes is wrong. They are all healthy. They're all normal. They're all necessary. So as we look at these boxes, you can see that we have denial, which is that experience of like, oh, maybe nothing's really wrong, or I'm just going to pretend like this isn't happening. Or sometimes denial can be combined with sadness to be just kind of a numbness or a shock. Fear and anxiety, everybody's dealing with a lot of worry and concern. Kids have this unsettling sense that maybe something isn't right. Parents are worried about whether their kids are getting the experiences that they need. Anger is something that happens when we get overwhelmed. We can walk through the day, we can do the best that we can do, but knowing that something isn't quite right can cause flashes of anger. If you're having flashes of anger as a parent, if you're seeing flashes of anger in your kids, it may be something even that you want to talk to somebody. You can even talk to me, because anger can very quickly explode into even physical confrontations that can cause harm in the long term. And we want to avoid that while not denying our anger. There's just sadness and general depression. Not depression in a clinical sense, but depression in the sense that we're just feeling sad about this. Oddly, in every grief process, we go through periods of guilt, like I'm not trying hard enough, I'm not doing it well enough. We can actually begin to feel that the whole experience is a little bit of because of me, because of something that I did. And then the bargaining one, which sounds odd, but it's really something we all do. How can I fix this? Well, maybe if I do this, or maybe if I spend more time doing this, or maybe if I, and if you find yourself thinking, what can I do to fix this within your family? That's a part of the grief process as well. All of these with an arrow moving through toward this box called acceptance, where we come to some contentment with this. But in chronic grief, the landing and staying in acceptance can be very difficult, and you can expect that your children and you are going to bounce back into these other boxes depending on the stress of the day. And so what I want to encourage you to do with this tool, with this picture or something like it, is to use it as a way to help everybody in the family get into an understanding of what they're experiencing emotionally. Now, you may have picked up through these videos that I tend to look sometimes to the Bible for some ideas about how to best to deal with people. And one of my favorite verses in terms of helping people with their emotions is in the book of Romans, and it's in chapter 12, verse 15. And it says this: "Rejoice with those who rejoice, and mourn with those who mourn." And this verse and this advice, which I want to give you, especially as parents, is basically saying, don't try to talk your children out of the box that they are in. One of the things that usually is not helpful if someone is feeling sad is to be told, well, you don't have to feel sad. Look at all the happy things. Or if they're feeling angry, you shouldn't be angry about this. Emotions and grief are not a right and wrong moral decision. It's an experience that everybody has. And if you look at your own experience through this as a parent, I'll bet you can see where you've been in each of these boxes at various places. The best thing that you can do is to process these emotions together with your children. And this is very important for you as a parent. As you see your child going through these emotions, you may begin to have some anxiety or some fear. I want to assure you there is nothing wrong with your children if they're experiencing these emotions. They don't have an anxiety disorder. They're not clinically depressed. They don't have oppositional defiant disorder. They're experiencing chronic grief. And as you look at your own experience and recognize these boxes, you can then help your child when they are in the boxes, not by trying to talk them out of the boxes, but to be in the boxes with them, to allow sadness to be experienced not as a negative, but simply as a part of the process of grief, to allow even anger to be accepted as a part of the process, to be in the sadness with your child, in the anxiety with your child, in the fear, in even the anger, in a way that allows them to feel comfortable. Because what your children really need right now, and children, even your parents need this as they go through their own process, is they need to know that you're going to be there with them and through all of this. Chronic grief means we're in this for the long haul, and we don't really know when it's going to be over. So we cannot expect ourselves, we can't expect our children to simply jump into the box called acceptance, well, this is just the way it's going to be, in a way that means that they won't experience the other emotions through it. We can expect to have days where things are going great. This is a great opportunity to develop stronger relationships within your family. There's going to be some really fun times. There's going to be some real growth that takes place. But it doesn't mean that there aren't going to be times where you feel anxious, where you feel guilty, where you're trying to fix everything. There are going to be times when your children are going to go through those emotions. Experience the boxes with them. Enjoy the time when everybody is maybe in an acceptance box, but expect that over time there's going to be some revisitation of these 6 boxes that are a part of grief as I've best been able to understand and explain it. Well, I hope this tool has been useful for you. I hope it's something that you can use or modify or find some way. I hope it helps you to understand that what we're going through is normal. Again, I just want to remind you, there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with your children if you're experiencing grief. And in the experience of chronic grief, unlike acute grief where we can point to an event, in the experience of chronic grief, you can expect these things to resurface now and again. Rejoice with your children when they're ready to rejoice. Mourn with your children when they're ready to mourn. And know that as a family, you're going to be in this and through it together. It's the best thing you can do for your kids. It'll help a lot. Hey, I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and we'll look forward to talking to you next week.